Welcome to the kingdom. I'm Chris, and this is Good Enough Gaming. Howdy folks, and welcome to this video where we are going to take a look at WYSIWYG, when it's essential, when it's restrictive. But before we jump into that, if you're not already, make sure you subscribe to the channel, leave a like and a comment. It really helps the channel, and I appreciate it. Okay, so WYSIWYG. For those who are new to the hobby, or if you're unfamiliar with the concept, it's an acronym that stands for What You See is What You Get, meaning that the model on the tabletop is an exact representation of a specific model or unit in your army list, and that includes all the equipment, weapons, gear, and other options that it could potentially have, or whatever it does have, based on the loadout you gave it in the army list. So take, for example, one model that has just a basic rifle, and another model that has a missile launcher. If I'm playing a WYSIWYG army, I can't take the guy with the rifle and say that he's armed with a missile launcher too, or instead of his rifle, he's armed with the launcher. Every model has to be modeled with the exact gear that it has on its unit sheet or its data card. Nothing added, nothing missing. The question is, when is WYSIWYG called for? When is it necessary? When is it too restrictive? When is it beneficial to players? And when is it detrimental? First, let's talk about the reasons when it's very helpful. It does a lot to clarify confusion. There's no question what the model has. It's armed with a machine gun. It has a machine gun. The one that looks like it's carrying a rocket launcher is carrying a rocket launcher. And the one with the field radio is the one with the field radio. Just look at it and you can see. Another benefit, it speeds up the game. Players don't have to continually ask now, which guy is the one with the sergeant, and the one with the plasma, he actually doesn't have a plasma, but this one over here with the fusion gun, he's the one who actually has the plasma. You don't have to constantly stop and ask, what is that unit equipped with? A third benefit to WYSIWYG is that it prevents cheating, both intentional and accidental. Sadly, there are players who want to win so badly that they'll do just about anything to win, like changing a unit's equipment mid-game and hoping their opponent doesn't remember which one had which gear. So the three reasons are very important reasons why WYSIWYG can be helpful in many situations that gamers find themselves in, especially if you're playing massive high-point games with lots and lots of models. Now, if you're playing a skirmish game with just a handful, both players can probably keep proxies straight and keep track of things, but when you've got an entire tabletop filled, the previous three things I mentioned can grow exponentially. And when picking up games at a local gaming store, it's kind of helpful if both players are playing with at least 85 to 90% WYSIWYG armies. If it's your first time playing someone you've never met and they start pulling out all kinds of proxies and stand-ins, that may be the last time that you play with them as well. Okay, so in many cases it's helpful, but then what's the problem with it? Well, unless you're making your models out of Lego, or a god with magnetizing miniatures, or have an unlimited amount of cash, having to build, buy, and paint a new model every single time you want to try a new loadout is, well, let's just call it prohibitive. For example, if you play the Human Defense Force, the Imperial Guard, some army that has high model count and dramatic amounts of variety, lots and lots of different weapons available for lots and lots of different models, every time you want to try one with a different weapon, you've got to go buy a kit and build it with that weapon. And let's say when you design the army on paper or in your mind, or you have a narrative that you want to build, and you build it, and after 3 or 4 games you realize it's not a very effective army. And it would be better to exchange the plasma guns for machine guns, and to not bother giving the sergeant any equipment, and instead put the points into this over here. You may have to go buy stacks of new models to rebuild it. So it can be prohibitive. Now, WYSIWYG isn't too bad of a problem if you're degrading a model. So if you put a model on a table with a special weapon and you just tell your opponent this guy doesn't have anything, that's a little bit easier. If I set out 3 squads of Space Marines and say, yeah, they're all equipped differently, but every single one of them is just stock, no one has anything new, That's a little easier to remember. The opposite is a lot different. You put out 3 stock squads and you say, well, each one has a sergeant with a power fist and it also has a missile launcher too. That's when things can get a little hairy. When you start losing casualties, there might be a temptation to switch around which guy you gave the missile launcher to. And sometimes that might even happen by accident. The point is, it can really make the game a little bit touchy or difficult to keep track of. And the last thing you want is to get a reputation for being that guy who's constantly bringing all kinds of stuff that doesn't represent what's actually being played on the table. Now, I get it. Over time, if you play the same army for years and years and years, you'll probably amass a big enough collection that you can field just about anything and still be WYSIWYG. But for new players, players who aren't as invested, players who don't have the money to spend, or players who aren't as big into the hobby side of the game, WYSIWYG's more of an obstacle than a benefit. Now, I would argue that there are places where WYSIWYG is absolutely essential, like in organized tournaments or highly competitive play, especially when there are prizes that have real value at stake, like cash prizes, gift cards, free exclusive miniatures, things like that. Not only will WYSIWYG prevent cheating by making it impossible for players to try and switch gear mid-game or switch which models have which gear, but it's essential to maintaining the fast pace of a tournament. If you're in a tournament that's using time clocks and you're in a time crunch, the last thing you need is to have to keep asking your opponent over and over, now which weapon does that guy have and which unit was the one that did this, and the guy with the machine gun that's actually a plasma gun. You could see how that could easily be abused and also how it will just slow down the pace of play. The next place where I think WYSIWYG should be applied, maybe not as strictly as a tournament, but still there should be more of an expectation of it, is at a local gaming store, at least at open gaming events where players who don't know each other will be meeting and playing for the first time. Players showing up for a pickup game should be able to expect that the other players are fielding models that are majority or overwhelming majority WYSIWYG. A little proxying here and there is okay, but the proxy should be the exception rather than the rule. Now recently, there's something that has become much more prevalent in tabletop gaming that's throwing a bit of a monkey wrench into the whole concept of WYSIWYG, and that's model agnostic systems. For small gamers, model agnostic systems are absolutely essential. It's one thing to create a rule set. You can sit down, hammer out some rules, type out a PDF file, that's not a problem. But it's an entirely different kettle of fish to design and produce entire ranges of models, even just STLs. So model agnostic games mean that any model can be used from any game to represent a unit or an army. I would go so far as to say that model agnostic is almost the polar opposite of WYSIWYG. Now on the positive side, model agnostic is pretty obvious. It means you can use existing models to try out new games, instead of having to invest time and money buying models, building them, painting them. Instead, just grab something you already have, test out the rule set, and if you find you like it, maybe then you'll start investing in new models for that specific game. There's only a tiny initial buy-in for the rulebook. It also means that players have free reign to design and build armies using whatever miniatures, STL files, 3D prints, anything they want. And with such a hodgepodge of different models available from different producers and designers, you can have some pretty darn amazing armies and kit bashes. And then even if you get your models from different places, painting and basing can go miles towards making the whole army look like it actually was designed to go together. And like all those models are from the same manufacturer and were always meant to be fielded as a single group. So, for example, when I built my one-page rule sci-fi dwarves, I used Games Workshop Leagues of Votan as the foundation, but I really wanted to have that something to use for the drill unit. But Games Workshop doesn't make a drill for the dwarves, and I certainly wasn't going to pay the Forge World price for a termite. But then I found that Mantic Games had a drill for their Space Rat army that worked perfectly, and once it was painted up, it fit right in and you wouldn't know that it was supposed to be for the rat army rather than the dwarf army. I also added some heavy weapon models from Titan Forge. I added walker units from another different STL creator, but once everything was painted with that uniform color, it all fit in. So that's why model agnostic games are pretty darn awesome. But of course, there's the downside. So take this for example. Everyone who plays Warhammer 30k Horus Heresy knows that this is a Volkite weapon. Now, it could be used in one-page rules as a fusion gun, or a plasma gun, or a flamethrower, or a laser cannon. I mean, it could be anything. Now, imagine if I play 4 or 5 different games against the same opponent in one-page rules, and in one game, I use that model as a laser cannon, and another game, I use that same model as a flamethrower, and another game, I use that same model as a fusion gun. Over time, my opponents might start to get confused because every single time the same model is a different rule set. And so then they're going to start asking, well, is it the flamethrower or is it the fusion? Oh no, this time it's just a plain old guy. It's nothing special. So you see the potential problem that model agnostic poses to WYSIWYG. Because it opens the door to everything, it opens the door to everything. And while that's a relatively minor problem, it is still a potential problem. Now, there's even bigger problems with WYSIWYG and model agnostic games, and that's using models that don't really represent what they should. For example, you could take a tiny little model, put it on the table and say, oh yeah, that represents a dreadnought, or a walker, or a titan, or something a lot bigger. Now, one-page rules does try to reduce that potential minefield by recommending base sizes, depending on type of unit. So basic infantry are going to be between 28 and 40 millimeters. Monsters will be from 40 to maybe 100 millimeters. And then things that don't have bases because they're so large, those would be vehicles, those would be titans. That way, when you're playing, you can at least look at the base size and take that as a reflection of the status or the potential power of a particular unit. So I guess in a way what I'm saying is size does matter. But as far as weapons, it's kind of in the air. And another question, one-page rules is designing their own models. And when they designed each of those weapons, take for example the Human Defense Force, they designed a laser cannon, they designed a fusion gun, they designed plasma, they designed a shred rifle. So in their minds, those designs match a specific weapon. But by their own rules, you don't have to play those models as that specific weapon. So we go back to that problem of using the same sculpt in multiple different games as a different weapon each time. Now that might not be a big deal, but at the same time you do it often enough at big enough scale and it can actually become a much bigger deal. So I guess the question is, what's going to happen when you run into that kind of confusion? Now, these problems aren't without solutions. The simple solution, of course, is to ask your opponent for clarification, but that can bog down gameplay. Now, another effective solution is to make sure that you have a copy of your army list, like on paper or a file that you can send your opponent through email or text or something, so that they can see exactly what you have. That'll at least clear up any confusion as to what each weapon in a model or unit is. There's still the problem of which model in a unit of 10 is the one actually carrying the special weapon, but unless you want to go full WYSIWYG, you're just going to run into that problem. Now, a lot of players will do this already. They'll share lists or they'll go over the army before the game begins, but maybe it needs to be a more formal part of the pre-game setup. That written in the rules, along with rolling for mission and picking objectives, is share your list with your opponent. Now, it's usually done already, but maybe it needs to be a formal part of the game. That way you avoid accidental gotcha moments when your opponent learns that one of your units is a melee monster because they charged into it and, oh yeah, I forgot to tell you everybody's armed with power swords or something crazy like that. And at the tournament level, players should not only be able to get a copy of their opponent's army list, but they should have one that they get to keep during the entire match, and then they can give it back at the end. So that way they have your list and their list right in front of them. There's no surprises, and it can be used as an in-game reference. So in the end, what are we looking at here? Well, I would argue that, 1, WYSIWYG isn't as much of an issue for downgrading, saying that the good guys with the fancy weapons actually are just plain guys without any weapons. It's only more of a problem for upgrading. 2, strict WYSIWYG is essential for tournaments and highly competitive play. 3, A strong foundation of WYSIWYG should be the standard at a local gaming store, even in casual play, to ensure that a player can rely on things to be kept fair and reliable, at least until the players get to know each other well enough to relax a bit and be able to extend some courtesies and some leeway and be more flexible about what stands for what. 4. New players should be given lots of leeway as they learn the game, learn their army, and try out new builds and new loadouts. That's one case where I think WYSIWYG might have to go to the minority of models. That way a new player can build out an army with what they think looks good and then play around with different builds and features and model weapons and stuff like that. And then when they find what they want, then the expectation is, okay, now add on to your army to match that. Next, as players expand their collections and dive deeper into the hobby, they can try to lean closer to their armies being more fully WYSIWYG. If you decide you really like a game and you're going to devote a lot of time to it, I'm not saying you should be obligated, but there should be some kind of desire at the very least to make your army match what you're going to be putting on the table. Especially if this is a loadout that you're going to use over and over and over, you shouldn't be proxying over and over and over. Set a goal to slowly make your army as WYSIWYG as possible. And then last of all, model agnostic games are a creator's dream, but they might require a rethinking of how WYSIWYG works, how we keep track of it, and how that's going to affect things like one-page rules tournament play, where you do have a need for things to be very clear, but at the same time, it's a game that's based on bring whatever you want to the table. So I may have to talk to some of the folks who have been playing in some of the tournaments recently to see how did that work out. So what do you think? How do we balance the desire to build our models and armies the way we want, remove potential confusion in games, and avoid bogging down gameplay with endless questions and reminders, but at the same time, we don't make WYSIWYG so restrictive that it takes away the desire to play the game, because we can't afford it, we don't have the time, we don't have the motivation? Let me know down in the comments, and I'll see you next time. Until then, keep your dice on the table.